Rabbi David Foreman, in a lecture about Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, talks about the special nature of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, because he's trying to explain how profoundly terrible it was that Ahab and Jezebel built sanctuaries for Baal in the northern kingdom. So not only did they continue the custom or the law of Yeravam that forbade people from the northern kingdom to go down to the Beis Hamikdash, but they actually built temples to Baal. So he's trying to just give us a taste of what the Beis Hamikdash was meant to be and how ridiculous it was to try to replace it, and especially with something like idolatry. So in the process, he made the observation, which is a Rabbi Foreman-like observation, which is that if you had like a drone's eye view, a bird's eye view of the Beis Hamikdash, if we were looking down, it would look like a face. Not the building itself, but if you were paying attention to the articles of import, there were particular items: the menorah, the table with the showbreads, the golden altar, those are inside the building, plus the Holy of Holies with the Ark in it. And then outside, the dominant feature in the courtyard is the large altar that's sometimes called the copper altar, the large altar that had the big ramp, and it's where the sacrifices were brought. So if you looked at those from the top, in other words, you'd have X-ray vision so you could see through the building. So he suggested it would look sort of like a head or a face. The menorah and the shulchan, the menorah, the candelabra on the table with the showbreads, they would be the eyes. And then there was the golden altar, that would be the nose. And the ark in the Holy of Holies would be the brain, like at the top of the head. And then the copper altar outside, that would be the mouth. And if you think about each one, they sort of are appropriate. If you think about the candelabra, for instance, it's about light, and light is about seeing. The ark being the Torah, containing the luchos, the tablets being the Torah, so that would be the mind. The korban, where the sacrifices are done, that's like the place where you eat. That's a place where the mouth would be, because the offerings are brought up there. Even the nose being the golden altar, because the golden altar is incense. It's where the incense is, so it's for smell. The one difficult one, there's always one that you have to work on, is the table. Why the table is also an eye. But yeah, so he suggests it's a face. The reason it's a face is because, in some sense, when we visit the Beis Hamikdash, we're coming face to face with God. And this is an idea that he's developed in other lectures about the Mishkan, about the tabernacle, and about the Beis Hamikdash itself, that there are elements of the Beis Hamikdash that suggest that it's a place where the infinite meets the finite, where we say, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, make for me a sanctuary. God says, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell amongst them. But the very notion that there is some meeting point between God and man, I mean, first of all, what does it mean to say that there's just one? I mean, isn't God everywhere? And then, theologically, to suggest that there could be some kind of meeting point between the infinite and the finite is it's mind blowing to even think about it, but that's what it represents, and to some degree, what it does that the Beis Hamikdash is successful. That when somebody comes to the Beis Hamikdash, there's a potential there to encounter the divine in a way that is not possible anywhere else. There's a potential for some sense that even in a finite world of God's infinite presence, and the face is the great symbol of that. As we talk about God's face, the light from God's face as a blessing to us. And even though it does say you cannot, in last week's Torah portion, God says you cannot see my face and live, or man cannot see my face and live. If you sort of gather all the data, all the different places where it talks about God's face, you have to come to some conclusion that there is some kind of seeing of God's face that's possible. After all, later on, as a punishment, God says, if you don't behave, I'm going to hide my face from you. That means that if hiding his face from us is some kind of punishment, that implies that we get to see his face to some degree. And it even doesn't use the word face, but when it comes to the pilgrimage festivals, we are meant to show up in the courtyard, and it said to be seen and to see, to be seen and to be seen. Yera'eh. They will be seen. He will be seen. But also the Talmud, with a sort of wordplay, to be seen and to see. So we're there to see, and we're there to be seen. And oftentimes this is sort of characterized that way. There's a woman named Mimi Doe. I don't really know who she is, but she had a spiritual parenting email years ago. And one of my favorites from her was that a child said to her mother, "Listen to me with your face." And there's something about the face, interaction with the face, in a way where you can tell the person's paying attention, that is a kind of a point of intimate connection and contact.
Don't be looking at the cell phone when you're talking to me.
Right. And it's sort of an interesting notion that we have a pilgrimage. We come for a week, twice a year, and one of them maybe for just a couple of days. So we come 3 times. Let's say you have the opportunity, you live close enough, and you have the ability. You would show up 3 times a year, and you'd have this point of contact, and then you'd basically go home. I was thinking about this because I remember how important it was for me to go home to visit. My son, Shauli, I haven't seen him, Shauli and Rena live in Israel with their kids. I haven't seen them in 2 years. And Sippy and I are planning to go for Pesach. But he told me that he feels that he needs to come visit. And he told his wife the other day that he feels like his battery is somehow low, and that he needs a visit. And I think this is the case with many children. They need to be able to come home, see their brothers and sisters-in-law and things like that.
To you for Pesach.
Right. So that's in a person's magical dream, that will happen sometime. But right now,
yeah, I know that dream.
the natural course of events is that we're going to them. But anyways, he talks about needing to refill his battery. And what will it mean? It'll mean, coming for a week or so, 10 days. And somehow that'll be something. I remember even talking to my brother one time. My brother took a trip of children that were like Israel's version of Chai Lifeline. My brother Yaakov used to be the director of the Israeli version of Chai Lifeline. So these were kids that were struggling with very serious illnesses. And so he organized this trip for these Israeli kids to go to Disney in Paris. So somebody insisted, maybe more than one person insisted, they wanted to go to the Eiffel Tower. And they went to the Eiffel Tower. Now, how long are you actually by the Eiffel Tower, on top of the Eiffel, if you're allowed up even? How long is the whole thing? It's, minutes or whatever. But it was like a life dream. And I was thinking about that. What does that mean, a life's dream? And then you just do it for a few minutes.
Gone.
And then it's gone.
Dream.
And I remember even on one of the pastors' trip, because many of these pastors have never been to Israel before. And for many of them, this is the fulfillment of a life's dream, to be in Israel. And I remember talking to there were a lot of thoughtful pastors, but I remember talking to one in particular and saying, you were here, let's say we were at some particularly meaningful place for him. We're here for a few moments and then we're gone. What does it mean to say that's a fulfillment of a life dream? It was just a few moments, but there's something like that. You can touch, you can have a moment, and in a certain sense, you're touching something eternal. Somehow it lasts your whole lifetime, even though you were at the Eiffel Tower for a couple minutes, or this person, his view of the Kinneret is just for an hour or so. And at sunset, he's on a boat on the Kinneret.
Oh, nice.
And this is a fulfillment of something. But it's not just that he gets to check off a box, but that somehow there's something that filled up. There's something that filled up. So this is not exactly the same, but it's something. There's something like this. There's this opportunity built into this place, which is a kind of place that's no place. It's a kind of finite that's infinite. There's an opportunity to fill up our need for closeness to Hashem in that kind of infinite way. That it somehow can fill up, and then you could go home and you could go do what you need to do, and then you can come back for a refill, and you come back for it. Even like Shmini Atzeres, there's a midrash that says that Shmini Atzeres, that the 8th day of Sukkot, which we call Shmini Atzeret, that day is compared or explained with the parable. A king has a feast for all of his kingdom, and everybody comes for a week to visit. That's Sukkot. And then for his closest servants, he says, stay another day. Stay one more day. I want another day with you. And so the Jewish people are that group, and we get another day with Hashem. There's something about Sukkot that has a kind of international quality to it. But that last day, Shmini Atzeres, is exclusively the Jewish people. And there's something about one day, just one day, one extra day, a point of contact with from the deepest aspect of our being to the deepest aspect of the revelation of God that's possible on this earth. And there's like a day, and then you can go, we can go on. We can somehow go on, but there needs to be that day. In this week's Torah portion, also in last week's Torah portion, there is a mention of Shabbos right at the beginning of this week's Torah portion. It basically starts off, Moshe gathered everybody, the community, the whole congregation of Israel, and he said to them, these are the things that God commanded that you should do. 6 days you shall do your creative work, and on the 7th day it's going to be Kodesh, it'll be holy. Shabbat Shabbaton LaHashem, a Sabbath of Sabbath for gods. Kol ha'osa bo malacha yomat. You can't do any work. If you do work on that day, you will die. Lo savaru eish b'chol moshvaseichem b'yom Shabbos. You cannot light any fires in your dwelling places on Shabbos. And then he goes back to talking about all the stuff to bring for the building of the Mishkan. So why is Shabbos here? So it's understood to be here because we need to know. This is Rashi quotes this, that we needed to preface the commands for the Mishkan with Shabbos to tell them that building the Mishkan does not supersede Shabbos. Shabbos matters even though we're building the Mishkan, building the tabernacle. This is impressed upon us more than once, that the work in the Mishkan is not to be done on Shabbos. Why would you think that the work of the Mishkan would be allowed to be done on Shabbos? So one explanation is, and I saw this originally, I saw this in a work by Rav Hutner of blessed memory, in Pachad Yitzchak, in his work Pachad Yitzchak, but then I just heard Ramosha, on a recording, I heard Ramosha Shapiro of blessed memory quote this in the name of the Shlah, and I think the Alshich, that when we build the Mishkan, we're doing our version of the creation of the universe. God creates the universe, we build the Mishkan. It would be like a parent who's working on some project, and you have a child, let's say a parent who's a doctor, and the child's visiting, a young child's visiting his parent. So the father, or the mother is checking on a patient using a stethoscope, and over in the corner, the child has a stethoscope, and listening to the heart of their doll. So the Mishkan is our version of that story. We're the children, and we've built ourselves a little creation, a Lego version, a child's version of creation of the world. The world is the universe is a creation that allows, to some degree, at least from our perspective, it allows for an opportunity to make contact with God, for other entities, other beings to make contact with God. It's, from our perspective, an opportunity to serve God in the myriad ways available in the universe. And so when we build the Mishkan, it's also an opportunity to make contact with God. It also has all different ways for us to do it. It's a space on every level. In fact, Ramosha Shapiro said that it represents the secret. The face of the Beis Hamikdash is in some secret sense the universe. It somehow represents the world in some very profoundly deep sense, in a sense that cannot be articulated, but it can be mimicked. You may not be able to speak about the deepest aspects of it, but you could build something that somehow allows for the expression of that. And in some ways, you can have an encounter with that. An encounter, it allows for an opportunity with an encounter with something that you can't even articulate. So we don't, by not working on ours, we demonstrate that his creation supersedes ours. He is the grand creator. We are the imitators, and that his creation is the dominant creation. Ours is subservient. But other than that, the reason you might have thought otherwise is because, hey, we're working on the same thing. But also, you could say, another lesson, and this lesson is hugely important, and that is that we need to rest from our creation for the same reason that he rested for his creation. That the resting itself is a demonstration of mastery over creation. If you have somebody who's great at something, let's say you have a great athlete who is considered the GOAT, the greatest of all time, but they don't know when to retire. And, or let's say you take somebody like Muhammad Ali, who is maybe the greatest of all time, a boxer. I think many would argue that, but he couldn't stop until the point where boxing finally beat him, as opposed to him winning in the ring. It could be argued, and so it would be with an artist. Let's say you have an artist who paints, but they don't know when to stop. So you could have something magnificent at one point, but if they don't know how to stop, whatever they continue to do is going to undo the work, their magnificence. This is how Rabbi Foreman suggests that God's stopping shows us not just his mastery over creation, but he shows us how to be creators, that you have to let go. As parents, there's a certain point where you've done whatever input you're going to be able to do, and then you have to let go. You have to know how to let go. And so it is with all your creativity as perhaps you're the founder of some great company. And at some point, the company needs to move on, and you have to know how to let go. There's so many areas of creativity where this is an absolutely essential lesson. So stopping, this is just one of the points about stopping for Shabbos, but this is a lesson that it's not just an indication that God's Shabbos is more important than our Shabbos, but it's an actual application of the lesson that God, in a certain way, is saying, hey, this is what I did, and you need to do it too. I want to tell you about it. In fact, in the first tablets, in the first Luchos, that's what it says. This is why we keep Shabbos. We keep Shabbos because he rested. We rest because he rested. But what does that mean? In other words, that his resting and the fact that he tells us about his resting, because how would we know about his resting? We only know about his resting because he told us. But why is he telling us about it? He's telling us about it because this is an important lesson. We're creators at his side, and part of the fulfillment of his plans for creation is for us to be creators in miniature, but in order to productively create, you have to know how to let go. You have to know how to stop, and that's just, of course, just one of the lessons of Shabbos. One of the confrontations you have when you stop, and this is one of the difficulties about stopping, is that as long as you're involved in the process, there's an infinite quality to it. Once it ends, it's very hard to let it end, because one of the things you confront when your project ends is the finitude of that project.
That will be there next week.
Well, that's not how you're supposed to approach Shabbos, though. You're supposed to approach Shabbos like it's over. Whatever you did, it's over. Now you're moving on to new things. So, and this would be true with your children or with paintings or with your company, that once you're letting go, you're not just, part of the difficulty is not what do I do next? That's only what do I do next? What do I do next is part of it. But another problem is that the recognition of the finite nature of that. While you're in it, it's infinite. At some point, it's going to be finite. And there's something sad about finite. It's not easy for us. It's like when you have money in the bank, there's a kind of excitement. Because in some ways you have an infinite number of possibilities. As long as that money stays in the bank and hasn't been spent, there's all sorts of things that can happen or be done, all sorts of experiences that can be had, all sorts of things that can be acquired. But once you've spent it, it is what it is. And there is a kind of sadness when you've spent it, even though when it was in the bank, it wasn't anything. It isn't anything in itself. All it is that sense of infinite, that sense of unbounded possibility. That's all it is. It is nothing in its own right. It does nothing for you in its own right except to give you that experience. Once you've spent it, you actually have things. You have real things. But somehow they're not anywhere near as pleasurable as that first feeling when that money happened, especially if that money wasn't expected, but even if it was expected. When you first have the money in the bank, this is something like the joy of Sukkot. Something of the joy of Sukkot, when Sukkot in some sense has both, you could say, because Sukkot is money in the bank. You now have everything, you haven't used it yet. It's also finite because now you actually see what the harvest was, but there's some element, and it could be that that's the simcha. When it says v'samachta b'chagecha, you will be happy on your holiday, and specifically it's talking, this notion is extended to Pesach and Shavuos and then to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but it starts with Sukkot. Why is Sukkot the time of simcha, of this expanded, this sense of expansion? Because it's money in the bank. You have everything and you haven't used it yet. You've got the harvest. You brought it all in. You haven't used it yet. So this is, I would suggest, part of what is difficult about letting go. Part of what's difficult about letting go, of stopping, is the sense of the finitude. The Medrash marvels at what it considers an irony. When people, this is something, when the Medrash is talking about it, it's talking about it maybe 15, who knows, 17, 1800 years ago, who knows when this particular Midrash was first coined. But the Medrash says it's ironic that when a boat leaves on a journey, everybody is celebrating. And when the boat finally comes back to port, they're sort of, sort of sadly get off. It should be the opposite. When you were leaving on the boat, you have done nothing. You've done nothing. They even, and they apply this to a child. We are so excited at the birth of a child. And then at the passing of a person, we're sad. It should be the exact opposite. At the birth of the child, there should be, well, I don't know if you should be sad, although you do see these elements at least in a Shalom Zohar, but maybe, I don't know if you should be sad, but what's there to celebrate? The kid didn't do anything yet. Nothing's happened. The kid was just
healthy. That's
okay.
good.
I know, but this is an irony. You realize that they're commenting on this from a perspective. Obviously, it's the most exciting moment in many people's lives when a child's born, but it's sort of ironic because the child hasn't done anything. Finally, when the person has passed away, then that would be a time to celebrate. Now we can look over at their achievements. Something has actually happened. And we could look at their achievements and celebrate their achievements, but we tend not to do that. And it's not just
want them to still be there making more achievements.
Right, and we miss them and all that. But there's an aspect of it, you sort of get it. The same thing we were talking about. Because when things they're undefined, there's infinite possibility, and that's expansive and joyous. But when something is finally finished, it's finite, and there's a kind of sadness. There's this kind of sadness when you finish a book, when you've been reading a book, and then when you finally finish a book, as much as you're racing to finish the book at some point, but there's a kind of sadness when you finish the book. There's something about the encounter with finitude, the encounter with things as they are. This week I was looking at this word, and I'm sure if I look this up, I would see this is the case. But there's a word for forming something, yotzer, like God forms the light, yotzer or. That word, yud vav tzadi resh. So that, like if let's say you have a potter, and a potter is fashioning a pot. So that might be a word you would use, like a yotzer. This person they form things, they make things, but they yotzer or, God forms light. That word also has the word tsar in it. Tsar means narrow. Min hametzar karatika. I call out to God from the narrows, which most likely means I'm depressed. I'm in a narrow space. I'm sad. That the same word I'm suggesting, not as a linguist. I just noticed it this week, but I believe I will not be surprised to find that these are related words, because there is, when you have finished making something, that there is ironically a little bit of a sadness that it's over. But not just, again, that I have nothing to do now, what am I going to do, but also the encounter with the finite. There's something about that that's constricting. That and so this was, again, just something that I was thinking about this week. I believe that that's part of the difficulty. Part of the difficulty in letting go is acknowledging the limitation, acknowledging that this is finite. But this is it's a mistake. This is what the Medrash is sort of finding humorous, that this is a mistake, that other thing was just a feeling. It wasn't real. It was just a feeling of possibilities. You didn't encounter the infinite. You imagined the infinite. You weren't truly unbound. You just felt unbound, because things hadn't approached their finite thing. But the actual accomplishment is worthy of celebration. There's an aspect of Shabbos. Shabbos is called Me'ein Olam Haba. It is like the world to come. Like when you move on to the world to come, so there's going to be this kind of experience, you would imagine, initially a kind of sadness at the fact that the project is over. Like if you get the opportunity to reflect on it, I would imagine there's going to be a sort of sadness. The project of my life is over. It's no longer unlimited. It's coming to a finite end. And there is a kind of, again, approaching this kind of sadness, looking over the accomplishments. What are they really? In the light, as long as everything was still possible, everything had this shine of the light of possibility. But now that this is it, what it is, there is a kind of perhaps shock at the finitude of it, and a disappointment at the finitude of it. Is this it? But as the Midrash seems to be suggesting, that's ridiculous. That this is something. You could see Shabbos as a celebration of your creativity. That Shabbos is not moving on from your creativity to some place where you're no longer creative, but it's an opportunity to reflect on it and to celebrate it. That it's, again, there's many things that Shabbos is, but this could be another moment to teach us that those finite creations are why we're here, and they deserve celebration. Certainly in the world to come, we are going to, I know that in a lot of the writings, there are harsh words, we're told, in the world to come, you're going to reflect back on what you did, and you're going to be sad that you didn't do more, right? But ultimately, that's not what the existence is going to be about. The existence is going to be living the results of what you've done. And those results are going to be magnificent. That's how it's portrayed, that the world to come is a magnificent experience, magnificent. How did I get can't? A magnificent experience that is the living of the fully experiencing the achievement of our lives. It is the world that comes of the creativity from this world, and an opportunity to fully experience it. And it's going to be a time of expansive joy. That's how it's characterized to us. It's our own kind of, we live in the finite, we only understand the finite, but somehow we're not happy with the finite. It's like we get that we live in it, and we get that this is, but we're somehow not content with it, and we're saddened by it. In some sense, we're saddened by it. So maybe this,
Finite.
yes, but it's a funny thing, because that expansiveness that we had before there was nothing but expansiveness. There was nothing but hopes and dreams. There wasn't anything done. Ultimately, it could be argued that our joy should be taken in what we've accomplished, not in the possibilities of what we could have done. Everybody has possibilities, everybody has dreams, everybody has everything. If the world is not made of the dreams themselves. Ultimately, the world is made of the achievements, of the accomplishments of the people in it. Those are the things that are real. Those are the things that are meaningful. Those are the building blocks of what is going to be the world to come. Shabbos me'ein olam haba. Shabbos is like the world to come, and perhaps it has this quality too. This quality that allows us to recognize the achievement of the finite, and the reason to celebrate the achievement and completion of projects. It's not just move your head away from work. Work is not important. Work is not important. Shabbos is important. That's what's important. Yes, you work 6 days a week, but Shabbos, now that's something to long for. That's something to look for. Completely devoid of work. Work is just something we do. But no, I'm sure there's a level where that's an important way of looking at things. But at this place, it's not that. In other words, this is a celebration of the work. 6 days you do your work, and on the 7th day you rest. On the 7th day that and you sanctify it and you bless it that day. In other words, the completion of what you've done. You're blessing it and sanctifying it because you've done something. You've actually done something, and you're here to do stuff. You're here to do things, and you've done something, and you should recognize that that's something holy, and it's something that's going to have qualities that you don't recognize. Eventually, you're going to see that that's real expansion, that's real simcha, that those things which right now look somehow without splendor, that those things are eventually going to be so bright it'll be hard to look at them. The very same thing, and but it takes a kind of shift of mindset, and to realize that money in the bank is nothing unless it's spent. There's a rabbi, what's his name? Can't remember his name. He was originally Israeli. He was a great teacher. He was a businessman originally, wrote a lot of books, and he used to do a lot of seminars. Very compelling person whose name I know, but I lost him. Anyway, so he said that at a particular Shabbaton, the friend of a guy who was attending the Shabbaton, this wasn't even a guy who was on the Shabbaton, he was just visiting his friend who was at the hotel, an Israeli guy, says to the rabbi, he says, You can't take it with you, right? So the rabbi said, actually, you can take it with you. You can take what you've done with you. You can't take the money in the bank. The money in the bank doesn't go with you. But what you do with the money in the bank, that does go with you. It's a kind of weird phenomena of this world that we somehow would rather live in potential instead of the actual. That we'd always like to have possibilities and dreams instead of achievements and accomplishments. And it could be that this is one of those lessons. We're building the Mishkan. And potentially, when we're finished with building this Mishkan, it's just going to look like a tent and some sheets and stuff like that. But something's going to happen, and it's going to be embodied with the infinite. And we're going to realize that only when it was completed, only when it became the finite finished product of what we did, does it actually become a doorway to the infinite and a way to encounter God um, um, on a plane that otherwise is not available.